Good afternoon. What is a mild, grey and overcast day. It is Tuesday the 2nd of May. I've got a nice hot cup of tea. And a parcel to unbox. Let's get the knife out. Okay, just cut through the sellotape. Happy tape. What I have got inside here is, well, I think I'll just about see what that is. If I can show you that. Just try and get through all the tape. What I have is Die the RPG, and this is the special edition. Comes in a very nice slipcase, and I can already feel it's got quite a nice tactile feel to it. So let's break the plastic carefully with the knife. I was just finding a point where I can tear away Die. This is based upon the comic book by Kieron Gillen, and it's published by Image Comics. It's interesting in that what it does is it takes the idea of a role-playing campaign and turns it into a nightmare. Essentially, some years ago, friends were role-playing. They partook in a special basic scenario, and one of them went missing, and they can't remember what happened, and it's kind of scarred them ever since. But then the one that was missing comes back and says, "This is what's going on. This is what's happening in my world. Where has he been?" So let's have a look. First off, this is. Just show that that's incredibly sturdy thing, and that wheel feels very nicely tactile. But and then we've got cover again. That's how we've got this embossed effect, triangular effect. So you're dragged into a treacherous fantasy world made from your own fears, doubts, and desires. There's only one way to escape. With limitless adventure within your grasp, would you even want to? In Die the Role-Playing Game, you play a group of authentically flawed people from the real world who gather together to play a game but become trapped in a magical realm. What are they prepared to sacrifice to escape? What are they prepared to sacrifice to stay? Built by Gillen and Stephanie Hans, the creative duo behind the comic book of the same name, this 408-page book gives you the tools you need to build a bespoke world out of the obsessions and dreams of your friends. 5 new character classes drawn from the comic give players access to powers beyond their imagining, bargaining with gods, augmenting their bodies with strange technologies, bending the laws of chance, twisting the minds with a word, or channeling their deepest emotions into magical violence. The Game Master isn't left out. They get their very own class, the Master, who manipulates the rules of the game that the players are trapped in. Die the RPG is everything you need to play or run the game, aside from a handful of dice, some friends, and a burning desire to get lost in a hell of your own creation. Now, this is published by Rowan, Rook Decard, best known for the Spire role-playing game. This sounds like an interesting premise. Ever since you kind of got, you've had role-playing scenarios, and role-playing is a hobby. You've had stories about people being trapped in role-playing worlds. If you go all the way back to 1982, you're thinking about the recently re-released television movie Mazes and Monsters, starring a very young Tom Hanks. And that is, a character, you know, gets lost in his own world and suffers for it and can't come back out. But at the same time, just jump forward a couple of years, or even not even really long. You know, you have the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon in which the players are transported into a world which, like the one they have been gaming in. So, you know, you have that idea, but this is developed into a far more deeper and more mature take upon the subject. So, and you have contents. It's quite a difficult book to go through because this is quite heavy, and I don't want to kind of drop it or anything. But it's we open up introduction by Gillen, and then we've got the sort of comic strip there, which introduces sort of like the similar story to what happens at the start of the volume 1 of Die, and this is fantastically drawn. You can see that basically you've got a school reunion. They decide to play the game they played in the past, and things happen. You know, it's mixing, you know, nostalgia for that teenage exuberance, leavened with, years of adult experience gone wrong, and so on, and they are thrown into a world like that. So essentially, introduction explaining what Die is, what does it let you do, how is it different from other role-playing games, what a role-playing game is, how to use this manual, terminology, a note on tone, really just setting everything up as you would expect, but trying to be, saying this is an adult, mature role-playing game, approach it as such. And then the setting, it literally is a die. And then we get into the rules. The core mechanics. It's basically explaining that up front, so you have some idea of what a character can do in the game. And also essentially you can bring into things like real world flashbacks, so there is that idea of being in the game but coming back out of the game during play, so yeah, all the rules are explained kind of up front. And then we get into exploring Paragon. Essentially, those are the roles taken by the player characters. Options for advancement, quick, campaign, full advancement. So, depending upon the length of the campaign you want to play. And we have playing in a region world without 20 regions, because essentially the idea is it's played upon a die. 20, and that gives you 20 different triangular faces. As you can see there, it's replicated on the front. And you can proceed any sort of direction you kind of want the player characters to agree upon. And then we have planning your advancement choices. And it's all built around sort of like an emotional palette. So generally role-playing games don't tend to be built around some things like emotions, but they can be. So you have different kind of paragons. So here we have kind of like the dictator, and then we have explanation of what. So basically, play a dictator if you want to. Be an artist who performs to warp others' emotions and even create magical effects. Use your imagination and creativity to work out exactly what your awful gift can do. Be hated and feared for very good reason. And there is a note there on the dictator and consent because of his influence and what he can actually do in game. Then you have how to create one. And then talking about performance and audience, how he advances, and it's going to do the same for each of these paragon roles. And essentially got things, options, you know, essentially like the Great Dictator, the power behind the throne, you know, sort of kind of end games, and even, you know, the portrait of the artist as a monster. So really got some interesting role-playing, storytelling potential in just that one role. Then we have the Fall. And again, it's doing the same kind of thing. Play a Fall if you want to bound into action with a grin, knowing your luck will protect you. Get out of any situation by the skin of your teeth, even if it means making a few sacrifices. Deal with the chaos when pushing your powers too far, and inevitably bite everyone on the ass. And it says ass. I should have said it should be arse, really, given this is a British role-playing game. So these are all quite detailed, character concepts given form and emotional kind of depth. Then we have the Emotion Knight. Play an Emotion Knight if you want to be a powerful fighter in the land, capable of fighting armies single-handedly. Develop a bond with a signature weapon of the born of your psyche. Possess your process your tumultuous emotions by using them as an incendiary fuel for your powers. A similar kind of pattern there for the development paths. In that, it's basically on that, it's almost like a flower arrangement. So just look at all the other options in here. We have the Neo, be the chromed up cyberpunk rogue in a fantasy adventuring party. Select from an armory of magical cybernetic gifts you can personalize to your heart's content. Hunt desperately for the next score to fuel your powers. So you really kind of, I think there's sort of like 5 different kind of roles. I mean, we've got gifts, and the gifts that the Neo can have using Neotech, and gifts of the fair, gifts of the gun. So there's variations in there. Blink teleporter, and so on. Full AI enhancement. And then we have the Godbinder. Play a Godbinder if you want to unleash the power of a pantheon of your own design on the world. Barter with your gods for anything you want for a price. Deal with the awful costs of your deals. You're dealing with different things like the Eldritch God, the God of Excess, the God of the Wild, the Underworld God. You deal with archetypal deities for that class, and so really you've got 5 different kind of character classes, but you really need 5 players for this game. Then we have the Master. If you want to facilitate the game, break the rules of space-time and narrative to cast powerful magic, cheat reality to get what you wanted to go at risk. And then we get into, so that's all character creation. We get into rituals. Sorry, I've got a cat, but it's not mine, sat next to me, and I just noticed the bird on the lawn. The bird won't be around very long. In fact, the bird is just tucking into his dinner. So rituals is the chapter, so set procedures and rituals for running the purest expression of dice, what you should do play first. Everything else in the manual builds up to this material. It's best played by 2 to 6 players. One is the game master. If it takes the game, it takes 2 to 4 sessions to play. So there is almost like a programmed kind of campaign written into the setting. So you've got like a checklist to follow, and everything in play die before the following, so you've got a guide to the setup. So what happens when you're reunited, and then you get into actual character generation when you return to the table. And then what you do, the suggestions of what you can do in the later sessions. and more. So very much kind of this is very much like a really kind of big, grand storytelling game. And then, you know, the end game is if the players choose to leave die, or the players choose to stay in die. So you've really got a beginning, middle, and end for a die campaign. And then we have advice for running die for the game master. I'll actually say I love that. That's a really fantastic piece of artwork. Really, really, you know. You know, it's dealing with things like safety tools, X cards, styles and wishes, lines and veils, break-ins and check-ins, bleeds and so on. So it's all those things, because they're important in a role-playing game like this, because you are dealing with emotions, and partly sort of like, you know, the emotions behind the player characters, and essentially their loss at what happened in their teenage years versus where they are now as adults. And then we've got a guide to running the paragons, and there's examples. So you know things like, you know, running the fool, who to give it to, which player, that sort of thing. You know, advice to the game master on setting the game up. And it's doing the same thing for each of the different different classes. And then we have a discussion of you know, building die. It doesn't necessarily have to quite follow the trajectory of the graphic novel series. So building die, alternate worlds, you know, so we've got advice on that. In things, you know, things like reinterpreting old RPG maps, any pre-existing fantasy world, you know. So, you know, just saying, you know, rather than use any specific dungeon match or riffing on it or generic fantasy, just drop people into whatever fantasy world you like. Middle-earth, Narnia, the Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance's Kryn, Warhammer 40,000's Necromunda, anything. And I do mean anything. Roddenberry's Star Trek, George Lucas's Tatooine, Ron Gilbert's Monkey Island, so on. Yeah, it's all there. And you've got options there. Then we get into adventure structure. We have a bestiary. Generating native paragons that might be native to the setting, rather than, you know, the almost godlike position of the player characters. Looking at the fallen, which are the one constant of die. You know, they're going to be found across all of them. And then we get into, we need to have sort of like information here which includes spoilers from the Die comic. And this is going to run throughout this section, so I'll only show you in brief. We have creatures of fantasy, sorry, you know, basically adapting them. And things like automatons, bandits, and you have things like truths about bandits, truths about basilisk. You know, so you've got quite a lengthy section of creatures and beasts that the player characters can encounter. You know, truths about ghouls, so kind of like classic Dungeons and Dragons style fantasy creatures. So quite an extensive bestiary, all the way down to zombies, before we turn the page and we start on the nature of campaigns for die. You know, so we've got die the campaign overview. and guiding the sort of like the game master, the referee, and the players through the first 2 sessions, pre-game chat, persona generation, preparing for the second session, and then you have mapping your die. And then things like at the end of an adventure, have the paragons advanced. What do they want to do next? You know, so on. Dealing with things like other versions of you, other versions of the paragons. Developing a region. Does a region have a genre? How will you generate adventure in the region? What are the paragons doing there? And then campaign death. You know, this is dealing with the options, sort of like, you know, when a player character dies, handling shorter compressed adventures, and we have section on secondary characters and the archetypes that they can fall into. So fighting man, sorry, crossed out, fighting person, magic user, so on. You know, the great game. What else might be going on? Alternate social groups. So you've got ideas there for you know, different groups. You know, and the last, and things like the idea like the last game before graduation. Different concepts for playing a kind of campaign, and so on. And these are nicely done, so you don't necessarily have to follow the template presented in the comic book. You can create a bit more of your own. Free forms and pre-generated scenarios are suggested as well. You know, you know, idea of the total party kill in die and how that works. And throughout you have these QR codes for useful resources. Your more bestiary, extended bestiary at the back. Just, yeah, there's quite a lot of information in here, with further scenarios and ideas. And then, you know, so essentially you can take these and drop them into sort of like almost different dies or different faces of the die, and so on. And it's almost, this is sort of, it's essentially it's taking sort of like concepts like, you know, do you remember the first time, you know, you killed a kobold and killed its stuff, and took its stuff? The you know, the ideas of sort of like, so the experiences of playing role-playing games. And there's an interesting idea, die development, how you're all on an indie game team working on the creative director's masterwork. The project has been in progress for years and the company's been in crunch, punishing overtime for most of the year. It's running out of money. And coming out of that, rather sort of like, you know, almost like a computer game generation as die, and what happens. You know, and then, you know, a dungeon of one's own. So this really game is kind of playing with elements of role playing and how it's done, and aspects that you don't often think about or look at when you're role playing. You know, that it is sort of drawn from memories of role playing and developed that into taking that nostalgia and building upon that to create and build it. We've also got things like an Appendix 3, second session prep examples. We've got examples of play, samples of building content, and more. You have a Appendix 4, gameography, technically ludography, so that should be, if I'm going to be pedant, and of course I am, got some interesting interesting games that that can reference die, or die can reference some of which familiar, some of which aren't. You've got appendix further culture, appendix of content for further reading, and then of course the index, and that's it. So that is Die the RPG. I think that looks absolutely fantastic. It's a fantastic looking idea. Being able to bring essentially a role playing about a comic into being a role playing is quite interesting. And what we've got here is a storytelling role playing game. Unlike any, I think this is a grand storytelling role playing game about fantasy role playing and kind of its consequences, and and what happens when you are caught up in that world. So Die by Kieron Gillen and Stephanie Has, published by Rowan, Rook Decard, is available now. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this unboxing. If you have, please do click on the like button down below, and of course if you've got any comments or feedback, I do appreciate you taking the time to post those. And lastly, if you want to be alerted to get more unboxings in the Nook, where you'll see me out here with a box containing a book or game which I'll unbox and chat about to the best extent of my knowledge for roughly 10 minutes or so, all of course accompanied by a nice hot cup of tea. Time for a fresh one, I think. Then please click on the subscribe button down below. Thanks again for watching another unboxing of the Nook. Be back again soon with another one. Bye for now.